Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Brave Space Live. I'm Tychelle. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner and learning consultant, and this is...
Got excited there. Tried to jump together. My name is Mel. I am an author and a social ethicist.
Yes, so welcome to Brave Space, where we're going to be having tough conversations around anti-oppression and communal healing. And today we're going to be talking about interracial dating. Ooh. I don't know if there was a drum there. Okay, I was like, wait, is there a woohoo drum roll? We gotta.
That was a good buildup. Yeah, I felt excited when you said that.
Awesome.
Let's go.
So, after our conversation, we'll talk about what happened this week, and then if we have some time, we'll take some audience questions. And today we have something that we've done a little bit differently. We have our first guest.
Yay!
So I know, I'm so excited. Our guest is a personal friend of mine. I've done some DEI work with her. She's also a DEI practitioner, but I'll read her bio, her official bio, and we'll bring her on to be a part of all of the conversation for tonight. So Carissa Hyunhee Casey is an educator, a DEI consultant, a facilitator who works with various organizations to recognize and interrupt individual and systemic oppression. So true, because we do it together, and she does it outside of me as well, but we've done it together. So she's also a lifelong learner. She's pursuing her doctorate right now in educational leadership, which I'm not even sure how she's doing it because she's also a new mom.
That's pretty badass.
I know. So I haven't gotten to meet her daughter yet because of COVID, but I'm so excited. So she's focusing her research around impact and professional development on bias. When she isn't working, she enjoys living with her partner and her dog, who is so adorable, and her 3-month-old baby. So we would like to welcome Carissa.
Drum roll for Carissa. Hi.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me here.
It's really
so we'll
good to
get
have
right
you.
into the conversation, and we'll talk about how Carissa and I know each other. You'll hear more about us. We've done some work together. We worked at a nonprofit together. We've built DEI libraries together, all things like that. So on our topic of interracial dating, I kind of want to tell a story that's personal to me, but so I'm not one of those people who I've dated everybody. I've dated all races, but I remember the first time I liked a white guy. And so for me, the story goes, and I'm going to age myself when I do this. It was before there was MTV, there was The Box. And I was one of those people who, my mom would never let me request videos. Like, we don't got that kind of money. So I would wait for people to request videos. And I remember being in 8th grade and walking into the lunchroom and seeing a printout of the top 3 songs. And one of them was Hanson Mbop. And I was in love with Hanson. I was like, all of that I was like, I've never seen a guy with long hair like that. Like, I was in love, and I was like, I'm gonna marry one of Hanson. And my sister was like, who? So when I went home and told my sister, she was like, I'm sorry, what's a Hanson? And where's an Mbop? And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. So for then I was like, everybody was like, oh, Tychelle, you date everybody, you love everybody. Because then it changed from Hanson to NSYNC to Backstreet Boys. And I guess the story goes, and if you ever talk to my sister, I'm going to deny it. But me and my best friend wrote a contract with my sister that we were going to marry members of NSYNC.
A contract.
And it had a date on it. a real contract that is, my sister was like, you're not gonna marry a person by NSYNC. We're like, we are.
There was a contract to prove it.
And if you can find it on my Facebook, because she put it out there when she tried to collect her money in 2015. But in my defense, the year 2000, 2001, 2015 seems so far off. And now we're 6 years past that, and she still talks to me about this money that I owe her. So that was my first experience, or I guess thought experience with interracial dating and opening myself up, because there were boys I liked all around, but NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, and Hanson stole my heart. And now I look at them and go, I would not marry any of the guys from Hanson. Maybe still AJ from Backstreet Boys, but whatever.
I feel like I'm
So-
channeling the aesthetic a little bit today with my like hair and my flannel.
Exactly.
Like,
I would so marry. I would marry you.
yeah.
You listen,
feel it?
copyright infringement.
I think new theme song to this podcast.
I agree.
Absolutely think not. But thank you. So I just wanted to tell that little story because I thought it was kind of funny. And my sister will still say like I owe her. And I think at that time it was like I owe her $100. And could I give her
big
$100
money.
now? But when I was in 9th grade, $100 was big money. So anyway, so we
You're messing
wanted to
around.
talk to you all about interracial dating, the experience of it, the history of it, and things like that. So I just wanted to bring that story. I don't know if anybody else had any, like, absolutely. Carissa, tell us your story of interracial dating.
More stories.
Yeah, thinking about NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, I mean, I was all over their songs and making my own music videos to their music as well growing up. But I have to say, actually, I never would have thought I would be in this kind of podcast talking about interracial relationships because I'm in one. I was raised in a very traditional Korean family. My parents immigrated from Korea and really preserved their own culture for about like 30 years. So I grew up watching Korean dramas, right? Being told those are the kind of guys that I will be marrying one day. And my mom was thrilled to set us up because that's kind of part of the culture is like, parent involvement and them setting up who you're going to marry. And I, in their eyes, did really, really well until senior year of college with 1 month left to graduate. And then I met my spouse.
Oh, high school
I was-
sweethearts?
College.
College.
College
College.
sweethearts. Okay, but still, that's sweet.
Yeah, I was so close to that 1 month, and then I met this guy that I said, oh he is just the one for me. And I'll tell you everyone more a little bit, as we talk further about various things, but
You almost made it out. You
so
almost
close.
made it out. Your mom was like, you should have graduated early is what you should have done.
Yeah. Biggest regret there. No.
So we want to talk, before we talk about just interracial dating overall, we kind of want to talk about, I wanted to bring us back to like the history, because when people think about interracial dating, we think about, most people know about the case of Loving versus Virginia. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So 1963 was their case and they won in 1964, and it's Richard Loving and Mildred and Richard Loving. They were in Virginia and they were in a relationship. And I think actually Mildred is part Native American as well. And they had been in a relationship for like 10 years, like skirting the law, depending on where they would be moving. They had children together and they really they had moved out of Virginia, but they wanted to move back with their children back to where their families were because they wanted to raise their children around their family. And they just kept getting stopped by police. They, in the middle of the night, they got jailed. So they reached out to a white lawyer, and they wanted to talk about, like, we're already a family. It's legal in other states, but that was the federal or the Supreme Court case. But people don't know that miscegenation, which is not being able to marry interracially, is the longest running racial law in history, right? So when we think about racial laws, we think about Jim Crow, we think about all these things, but miscegenation is the longest running racial law, and it ran 300 years, 1664 to 1964. And the reason for it, and everything's wrapped up in racism and patriarchy, but white women were marrying black men. And if you were a white woman and you had land being passed down to you by your family, when you married that black man, it became his land because women were still property. So women were still property. So to break that up, they came up with they had the term white, and they made it so that black and white people could not marry. Now that's in the U.S. because there are other laws in different time frames around the country when it changed. Like London ended chattel slavery before America did. So it's this longest running U.S. racial law, and it's just so interesting because women were property. Our property became a man's property, and now that free black man had property. So to stop that, they enacted, and I'm talking with my hands, enacted the law of miscegenation. So it's the longest running racial law, and I think that's such an interesting point. I don't know if anybody else has anything they wanted to add to that, or things they thought about with that. But I always thought that was such a long, like, it's such an interesting case. And I think about it specifically because my mom was born in 1964, so it's not as if it's like interracial dating in the U.S. is so old. It's like it's still fairly new. My mom is 58, 59. She'll be 59 in December. So it's only been 59 years that it's been legal. Not that it hasn't been happening, but that it's been legal. So I think that's such an interesting point when we're talking about it.
And to your point, Tychelle, 1964, that's really recent, right? Our parents' generation, my dad actually was 14 at the time, and he came to the US when he was 18. So just 4 years difference there. And the fact that I can't imagine now, right? That I would not be able to marry my current spouse, because really, if you think about it, it's ultimately about that power and money. It was about property. It was about having that power, not even about people, right? So, I mean, not surprising, right? The way that a lot of our policies have been driven in the US historically, but just the recency of it. And, like we know, it doesn't, just because that 1964, yes, it was significant that there were some changes in terms of law, but socially, I mean, for the longest time, not a lot has changed. And I think that's also part of some of the challenges I personally had being in interracial relationships too.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the word miscegenation as meaning the mixing of blood or the mixing of genes, right?
Yep.
And that's doesn't that tie way back into like the one drop rule and all the rules of, people like basically white people thinking that, their blood had like racial inherent like special qualities back to like the days of eugenics, and mixing blood with people of color like depurified the race or made you a race traitor in some capacity. So the property is interesting, the eugenics part is interesting, and there's just like so much here. And that's why it's like so troubling when people because I think a lot of these views are still around, right? And people don't know I think a lot of people in our country don't know this history and how painful this has been for so many folks. And like, I've seen some current day anti-vaxxers talk about the fact that they don't want a vaccine because they don't want the mixing of blood, and not realizing what that evokes for so many people. So anyway, wow, there's a lot here.
It is, and it's so interesting. And that's kind of, I brought the topic because I am also married to a white guy. Shocker. He does not look like one of the members of NSYNC. Whatever. His high school picture, my best friend did see a picture of my husband from high school, and she was like, he was exactly who you were in love with. I was like, but he didn't look like that when I dated him. He's like the captain of his swim team. But whatever. But in the work that I do, there's a lot of conversation around like people being married and having interracial marriages and doing this work and having all of these kind of conversations. So it was one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in wanting to have this conversation, because there's a lot of work going around, even in TikTok, like you see like conversations about biracial people and what if your race is your phenotype and all of those things. So I thought it would be a good conversation to have, and knowing that Carissa also, we do the same type of work, and that we both are married to men of different races than us, which is a really interesting conversation. So that's kind of why I wanted to, selfishly I wanted to have the conversation, because I really wanted to have Carissa on. So it's a part of it. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. So one of the things I wanted to at least kind of talk about a little bit before Mel, if you get into any questions, like what it means to be like fetishizing. I think that's a really, really big thing when we're having part of this conversation. And something that my husband and I have had to talk about, right? The fetishizing of, and I think specifically to the fetishizing, the over-sexualization of Black women in general, and then a fetishizing of Asian women. And I know you can speak to that, Carissa, because we've had some of those conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I keep thinking about just my college experience doing, and, I do this work with Tychelle, which is awesome. I always love working with Tychelle, but also personally, I really wanted to be on here and talk about it, because there's so many personal experiences that I've never really had an opportunity to talk about any of these either. So I may be unpacking a lot of stuff here. So thank you. But I think back to college, and there's because that's a lot of the times where I went through the struggle of trying to figure out, okay, do I have to be with someone Korean or someone of my race, or can I really just love who I love? And one of the things that often crossed my mind that was when I would even get closer to white men and during college, I would always worry that it was this yellow fever, because that was part of the social conversation, right? So and so has yellow fever. Hey, did you hear? And so I would always worry that it was just more of a fetish and not really about getting to know me and being in real relationship. And then there's also the different standard of beauty of how oh, for an Asian you're really pretty. Oh, for it's that you are different, but you're pretty is not for me, but you're pretty, or you're great. So between those things, like, it was even hard to build any kind of trust to even start a relationship, I think, with people who are outside of my race, because I also had those messages come through.
I think that's so interesting too, because I've never really contended with the term jungle fever, but there are terms for this, right? I don't know if there is a term for white men, like specifically white men dating Latin women, but I know there's the thought process of people being spicy, like as food or whatever. But like, yeah, the thought process of jungle fever, because I didn't go through it as much specifically. I think part of it because of what you talked about, Carissa, with not fitting the American beauty standard, whereas one of my best friends is a thin woman, and she went through it a lot, where guys would be like, oh, I'd date you, but I don't know if like I'd be in a relationship with you. So I kind of like got spared from that, because I was like, because I'm a overweight or bigger black woman, so that it wasn't the same thing. It wasn't like this. And we kind of called it, instead of calling it jungle fever, we kind of like called it hot black girl syndrome. Like, oh, she's a hot black girl. That happened so much in our early 20s, where people were like, oh, they would tell her like, you're so hot, and they wanted to date her. And I'm like, and it kind of turned her off from having interracial relationships. But she's not here, so I don't want to talk to, but she did listen to the first podcast and was like, yeah, I told you. So we were talking about it, but it is. And I think I was spared a little bit by it, but not necessarily completely, because I also had a person tell me, I don't know if a white guy's going to want to date you, because, we usually date like thin women. And I was like, okay, like it was a thing. So it is part of the conversation as well.
What does it feel like to be fetishized for your race?
I'll let you start with that.
I was thinking, where do I start?
Right.
Well, I mean, I think, like I said before, I think one of the things is trust, right? Just from a basic human to human level, it's hard to make connections because you don't trust. It's hard to trust if it's a fetish or if it's a true, genuine relationship that somebody wants to build with you, right? So the fundamental of dating and building a relationship just kind of goes away, or it becomes a little bit more challenging. And relationships and dating is challenging to start with, so you're adding on layers to that. And then knowing, also, I think it makes you internalize some of those things, and so your own self-esteem or your self-perception of who you are and how you perceive yourself also gets impacted. And it depends. I think about this as an educator too, of just, depending on what age, because this happens not just in college like I'm talking about right now, but it happens throughout. So during especially those delicate times where students are like trying to develop their own identity, and that's the kind of messages that they're getting, is that, hey, you're less than, you're different. People may not want to really be with you. And I think during those times that has a really severe impact on just confidence and who you are. And there's confusion around who you are, and the fact that you have to fight for who you are because of those kinds of messages that are being sent around.
I think too, for me, because I was spared some from it. It wasn't like as intent on in my engagements with, and I will say, like, I liked Hanson and NSYNC and things like that, but I went to like a predominantly black high school. I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood, so the I guess sexual encounters or anybody that I knew, and I mean sexual in like a enticing way, was men who were black very often. And that's a whole different conversation that we can have about being fetishized and over sexualized as a black woman. But it was when I started dating white guys, me wanting to like make sure that they weren't dating me because they wanted to see like a girl who was like the black girls in the videos, right? That was a big thing, like the video vixen thing, especially I would say in the early 2000s is kind of like when the first white guy I dated. I didn't want to be like, okay, all black people are a monolith and we act like this and we look like this and we talk like this. And that was something that really I was conscious of it when I was dating, just like making sure that it wasn't like, oh, I didn't know you liked these things, or I didn't know you were smart as well, or like dating a black women are being really fetishized for our bodies and being like, oh, black girls have big butts, like that's why I like black girls. Because I remember going out on dates with guys, and I went on a date with a guy on from, I guess it was like OkCupid or something, and he was super handsy, and I was like, no, we're not gonna do this again. Like it's not a thing. So for me, it was kind of it didn't impact my psyche because it wasn't at a young age in that way. But it was kind of, and because I think of the dynamics, I wasn't really like it didn't impact my self-esteem because I wasn't at I was post 25 really, or in my early 20s post 25, and I was like, you are just weird, this is not okay for me. So I think because I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood and went to predominantly black schools, and it wasn't really until college that I started meeting guys that were outside of my race that it was a different engagement for me. So I think that for me, that's how it impacted me anyway.
Tychelle, did you ever get asked, I don't know how to ask this question, so I'll just be awkward. Like when you're going through your Hanson phase, or like, liking white boys, did anyone ever question like whether you were pro-black or whether you, like, did you ever get questions like that you had to field?
I think now I get more questions like that now than I do than I did then, I think. So for me, I mean, I think when I was a teenager, people just thought I was like a general teeny bopper. So I was kind of out in my neighborhood. I'd be like the black girl that everybody would be like, oh, Tychelle listens to white music. And that would be like the thing. Because like in my neighborhood, it wasn't like there was a new, like every black person in my neighborhood thought all white people listen to Nickelback. And then you start engaging with white audience, and the white people will tell you the only people that listen to Nickelback are black people. So it was more like that. But I get questioned now because I do DEI work. People will ask me like, do you like, oh, how can you be pro? Because I'll say I'm pro-black, and people say, well, how can you be pro-black when you won't have black children? You're married to a white man. And I don't know if I told you this before, that it was a funny thing that I put online because I was like, oh, I don't celebrate the 4th of July. And somebody commented to me, you're married to the 4th of July. And I could not do anything but laugh. But like me and my husband have those kind of conversations, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. So people question that for me all of the time. Like really? all of the time. Wow. I think because I'm so deep into this work now, I get it a little bit less. But people, when I was growing up, it was you talk white, you do this, you do that, and that's a whole different like being an Oreo, that kind of thing, when I was in my teen years. But as I started to do more, and Carissa's like, yep, people calling me different things. So when I was younger, it was more about me. But when I dated a white guy, people just expected I would date a white guy. But I remember the first time I met somebody and they were like, you're not married to a black guy? He's white? And I was like, oh, it felt different for me. But people question me being pro-black all the time. And I always tell people like, him being white doesn't negate my blackness. And if I can't be, and I think people assume that when you are in a relationship, you amalgamate to each other. And I don't think that we do that. My husband is white. He's also Jewish. And we kind of mix traditions together, but we celebrate Kwanzaa because I don't celebrate Christmas because I'm not Christian, and all the other things that go along with that. We celebrate Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. And like, that's kind of, Kwanzaa. That's like how we celebrate things in our household. And I am probably more engaged with all of the things with DEI now than I ever was when I was dating anybody else. And his whiteness doesn't negate my blackness. I'm black every day, whether I'm with him or not. And I think we are having those conversations constantly for who we are. So people are gonna question my blackness, my pro-blackness. And then people are like, well, you have to have a black family, you have to raise a black family, live in a black neighborhood to be pro-black. I'm like, well, the way our society is set up currently, you can't do all of those things. Like, I'm shopping at Target. I can't, like, I'm not just shopping all black everything. And you can do that more, but there are certain things that, you know, in our lives that we use as convenience, and it's hard to find all of those things. I'm not saying that you can't shop black. I shop black. We just had our wedding in August, and we had a rabbi officiate because I'm not religious, but every vendor I could find was a black woman. Every DJ, dressmaker, the person who made my husband's suit, the tailor for my husband's suit, my wedding plan, as black as could be. We jumped the broom and broke the glass. Like, we live in a duality household, and that's how we are. So I know Carissa probably has some of those same experiences.
I'd love to hear from Carissa too. Like, do you get accused of like not being as pro-Korean? I guess I don't know what was this equivalent
term for that one. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about your experience in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm usually specific to say I'm Korean because Asian is such a broad term. That can be a whole nother conversation as well. And I think I do get this. And I actually just recently was thinking about this a lot because in the Korean culture, so I have a 3-month-old. We have a 3-month-old, and that's right around like 100 days since she was born. And it's a Korean tradition. It's called Paegil, 100 days. And you do a little celebration with traditional food just to celebrate, because historically not a lot of babies, you know, survive the 100 days. But also, fun fact is, I don't know if anyone's interested, but gestation wise, if you take out the 2 weeks before you ovulate, it's about a year since from conception to when the baby's out in the world. So I think that's really neat. But anyway, I was going to celebrate this. So I'm talking with family on my side, and they're all really shocked that I want to do Paegil. They perceive me as someone who only wants to celebrate things in the Western culture because I have a white husband. And I thought that was just like interesting for me to just reflect on, because even before baby, I did try to celebrate different Korean cultures. And, you know, yes, I didn't do it as much as maybe my family would have growing up. But it was just interesting and shocking in a way for me to hear, wow, like, you want to do Paegil? Like, oh. And just like Tychelle, what we like to do is we're trying to combine things. So we had the traditional rice cake and an apple pie, because my husband loves apple pie. And we're just trying to blend, you know, different kind of traditions as well. But definitely get it. And I often remember when we were dating, and I was living in New York City, and my spouse like loved to go to K-Town, right? For him, it was like learning about this new culture by dating me as well and being in this relationship, and he wanted to really learn more. So he would always want to go to K-Town, but I felt uncomfortable at times because we would get stared at. And this is my stereotype totally, but when I would see someone who's like my dad's age and they would stare at me, I just felt this like, uh-oh, I know what they're thinking. They don't think I should be together. They don't think we should be here holding hands, all of this stuff. So that kind of pressure or feedback from socially from our surroundings, I think absolutely. And it still happens, right? I'm talking about when we started dating to now. This was just like 2 weeks ago.
That makes me, that's so funny, because that makes me think of, like, I was dating a guy before my husband for a few months, and we were going into a store in my neighborhood, and he was like, he was picking me up from getting my hair done. And for people who don't know, like, the black hair salon is like barbershops and hair salons are like a women's safe haven. Men don't really come in. The only people who come in are the people who are selling CDs, DVDs, socks, lighters, food, whatever. And I'm in the hair salon, and I said, oh, you can just wait in the car and I'll meet you outside. And when I came out, he was like, did you not want me in there because I'm white? And I was like, no, it's because you're a man. But I get that all the time too. I mean, I went to the hairdressers maybe a year or two ago, and my hairdresser saw me at IKEA with my husband. Maybe it was like 4 years ago, because we've been together 8 years. And she was like, oh, you didn't want to speak to me because you were with your white husband? And I was like, no, I just didn't remember your name. Like, she was the salon owner, and I was like, I just didn't remember her name, but she thought it was because I was white, and he was white. And I'm like, No, I don't think that I'm better than you because he's just white. And I think that's just such the build up in people's heads. But they're so, people, when I first started dating my husband, I was like, are people looking at us? Are people looking at us? Sometimes people would look at us. Sometimes people would stop us on the street and say certain things. And I've had people say lots of different things, but it builds up in your head and you're like, okay, like just be quiet. Just keep your head down. Like don't look anybody in the eye. And if you do, just don't say anything because it could be a thing, but it is so like it makes you insecure because you think about it so often until you get to a point where you're not necessarily thinking about, or you go somewhere new and then it happens all over again. It's kind of like coming out, but not coming out.
Right. So I lived briefly in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I know like every city in the country, basically, we're still a very segregated place. We're still a very segregated nation. But I like to sing some jazz and some music, and the drummer that I was playing with, he was a black man married to a white woman, and we had a conversation around how hard it was for them to find spaces where they felt like they could be comfortable as an interracial couple because the space itself was very interracial. One of the only spaces in this little jazz club called the Barking Legs Theater, it's this like very hole in the wall place. One of the only spaces in the whole city that was like you actually saw people from different races hanging out with each other. It's very strange. And I think this happens a lot of places. But yeah, it was interesting. And I also, had another couple friend who got married. I actually got to officiate their wedding, which was awesome. But they were saying, and they were, like young, like late 20s, early 30s, and they were saying that they had been together since high school. They were saying that they had horrible things. People said horrible things about them. So this is current day. I think it's like important to remember this stuff is happening now, right? It's easy to think of it as like something our grandparents had to deal with, but as you both can attest, and as I'm sure other people watching this can attest, like this is here and now. People still think that this shouldn't happen. That interracial relationship shouldn't happen. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to, and I want to make a caveat. I want to kind of go back a little bit. I don't want people to think that like dating interracially is like coming out, but it is this like you do have to tell people, and it becomes this thing where every time you bring your spouse somewhere, people have thoughts about who you are and what's happening. And I remember being in college when I think it was a guy I was dating, and somebody was like, "Oh, you like white guys? Do you like him? Do you like him? Do you like him?" Which is something that LGBTQ people say that they go through as well. Well, they'll be like, oh, I'm gay, and they'll be like, oh, do you like this man, this man, this man? It's like, no, I still have a type, I still have standards, I still have people that I want. Like, I don't think every white guy is cute, you know what I mean? So I don't want to akin it to like the painful process of coming out, but it does to some degree sometimes mirror it in certain ways where you have to like introduce them, you have to tell them about them, and then especially I would say in my line of work, and probably even Carissa's line of work, that we have to like preface it like my husband's white, but like he knows. Like, and look, we have these conversations, so it's not just he's some, when I go home, I take off my DEI or I take off my blackness, and I'm just like with my white husband enjoying myself. It's like, no, I'm still black at home too. And if we weren't having these conversations, I wouldn't be able to be married to him, right? Like that's kind of.
I 100% agree. And I know Tychelle and I have talked about this, right? The amount of conversations we have at home with our spouses about everything related to DI. I mean, we have to, that's the life, right? And I also find that it's this, even when we meet because we just moved to a new state and we're starting to meet new people here too, though it's hard with COVID, but it's almost like you have to feel it out again and see if like we're willing to be friends with people who can have these conversations as well, because there's no denying, like, you know what, things are constantly happening that really just is been for centuries an issue around race, right? If our friends can't have conversations around this as well and recognize our reality, we're not real friends then, right? So it's we need to be able to have these conversations. But because of that too, I think there's this period where when my husband and we meet new people, we go through this like carefully having conversation with them to gauge how much they're willing to talk or understand. So it adds a different layer to it. It's not that it's not doable or it's not, but I think that it adds a different dynamic to it.
Absolutely. I think about that too when we're thinking about like having children, right? And I know you just said you just had a baby. So people, I mean, I have to like engage with, especially people of color for me, in that I married a white man so I could have biracial babies. And I'm like, so like when people will meet us and say, "Oh my God, your babies are gonna be so cute," and I'm like, "I know, aren't I so cute?" Like because I know often they're saying it because there's this fetishization of biracial people looking a certain way, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, your baby's gonna be so cute." I'm like, "I know, their baby's mom is so cute," so I have to like follow it up by that because I don't want to tell people in the world like, "Yeah, my baby's gonna be ugly," like I don't want to do that. So I have to be like, my baby's not just gonna be cute because it's a partly white baby, because you also don't know what your child's gonna look like. So, and you know, there are things that, I mean, I'm married to him, so there are certain things I want my child to have of his. Like, I want the baby to have my eyesight, because you see, I'm the only person here without glasses on right now. I wanted to feel a part, so I did bring my glasses with me. These are my blue light glasses. But, like, my husband wears glasses, so I'd like them to have that. But, you know, my husband has really strong nails, so I'd like them to have that. But I'm not thinking, like, I want the baby to have your skin tone. And it's just, like, you know... Ugh. So that becomes a part of it as well. When you're having children or thinking about having children, people want to celebrate that because that's the other part of it. People feeling weird about going places because you don't want to be judged, but then also being fetishized by other people, like, "Oh, you married a white man, that's so great for you." And or like people thinking I married my husband because of his money. And I'm like, when I met him, he was driving a 1998 Nissan Sentra. He was not pushing in the lap of luxury, and also he had that car since high school and had rust spots in it. So I didn't marry this man for his money, and he's a PhD student, so you know that's not a lucrative career, and I had the more advanced degree because he was a PhD student. So it's not as if I was marrying him for something, but people think that. So it is part of it. I know, Carissa, that's probably something that you've experienced as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting, all those messages that you get and how that kind of also influences later in life for you.
Yeah.
I think I used to get that all I still get it all the time is, you know, you have such cute babies, you're gonna have such cute babies. And I remember all throughout college that used to be actually kind of a joke within the friend group too, of like, "Oh yeah, you know, well, Carissa is gonna definitely too bad she wants to marry Korean because she would have really cute babies." And then I did meet a white guy and have really cute baby. But that's not because it's not because of anything else beyond that she is just cute for who she is. But that kind of appearance and that kind of talk around it also, now I'm really I'm aware of it from a gender and sex point of view, right? Girls tend to get all of these comments about their appearance versus boys oftentimes will be asked about what they want to do, what their dreams are, right? So I'm also mindful of that and making sure that my child doesn't get some of those messages growing up about race and gender because of those things. And even now I'll get comments about, everyone loves to say the baby looks like, one or the other. And in the Korean, well, I'm going to just limit it to my family, right? So my family often loves to talk about, the skin color as well. So it kind of mirrors that colorism, right? Within even the same race, right? The idea is that if you have a lighter skin color, it's actually more favorable.
Right.
And they do have more privilege in that sense, in the way people treat them. And so it was really just interesting is one of my family members had kind of as a compliment said, "Oh, like your daughter is very white," right? And it's like, meaning that, okay, that's a great thing because white is definitely better than being darker. And so those kind of comments, I'm like cringing. And now that I have a child, I'm like, how do I stop these messages?
Right.
How do I
stop her? And then once she gets old enough that people can say them to her and she understands them, how do you not help her not internalize them? Me and my husband have had specific conversations around that, in that start saying now like how beautiful I am, so that when we have, and not saying it now, he says it to me now, but like when we have children, making sure that we both say like, "Oh, mommy's so beautiful and baby's so beautiful," because we don't want my child to think that dark skin is not beautiful. Like I don't want them to think, oh, I'm biracial and I'm so exotic, and to like internalize that exoticism for themselves, or that their hair is going to be big, because you never know. Like there are biracial children who have completely straight hair. I'm say biracial mixed with black, who have completely straight hair and look white, what we call white passing. But are they better than, a darker skin? Because there are also biracial children that are mixed with black that you can't tell that they're white and they look black. So it's a toss up. It's hard.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of interesting is, right, children will change, especially by multiracial children, biracial children will change as they grow up, right? And at one point they may be white passing, in this case, or like my daughter at times may look more Asian. So depending on those different appearances too, like managing and helping to support her to be able to be comfortable in both of those different identities,
Right.
is definitely an area where we're having so much conversation around that as well right now.
You were about to ask a question. Go ahead.
What do you both think about the term passing? And I've heard a few activists in different arenas talk about how problematic that term is. And I honestly wonder what you think. I've actually heard it a lot regarding trans women saying that they're passing. And that's probably more of a safety issue than what you're both talking about, but maybe not. So I'd love to hear what you think about using the term white passing. And
so I think it's interesting. So, and I have to talk about it from from my perspective of being a black person, because it has a lot of historical reference from slavery to Jim Crow to like people like there was a woman who married a black man who was enslaved, a white woman who married a black man who was enslaved, but they had children and they could pass for white. So therefore she passed her husband as her servant, right, for them whenever they would go out, and her children as white children, and her husband was just at home or something like that. So I think it has a lot of historical reference. So, and I also think when we're thinking about what is white passing, like somebody said the other day, like I saw a biracial person saying like, people say I'm white passing, but that's because your idea of white is Kylie Jenner, but she's so dark now that you think that that's passing, but really I do look ethnic, she just looks like me. Right. So it's that thought process. So when I say white passing, I don't say it in a way that is like acceptable or great or amazing. Right. Yeah. And I think in the trans community, they also call it clocking. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but passing for white. Right. Like in being able to, I don't know. And I'll let Carissa go too. But, one of the things that me and my husband talked about is not calling our children black. Right. And we also have to contend with what they will look like, because, there's a lot of conversation about whether your phenotype is your race and then your culture is your ethnicity, right? That we know that they're going to be black and Jewish, but if they look more white, are they then white? Right? So that same conversation. So we're having a lot of conversation about that now. And that is the basis of being in an interracial relationship. If you're not willing to have a conversation, then it's going to be a really hard go of it, or it's going to be more problematic than not. But Carissa, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, I think, recognizing all of the historical connotations to that as well. I think we're in a similar place as what Tychelle was talking about, is having conversations around, okay, what does it really mean? And what does it mean when somebody looks more white, or depending on how they identify, right? I think there's kind of a little bit of a difference. Like I may identify as one way, but also it's still a reality when people are going to treat me a certain way because of the way I look, right? So like I was saying with my daughter too, at some point, like if people think she's white and she identifies as a mixed biracial child, yeah, there's going to be a little bit of different experiences there. But I want there to be this just awareness that, hey, if people treat me with privilege because I look white, okay, what am I going to do about this too, right? I just don't want it to go untalked about, is basically, I think so. It kind of comes back to this awareness piece, and being able to talk through that.
Yeah.
We have a listener question.
Oh, you do? We do?
Yeah. Well, it's changing the subject slightly. So, did you want to finish that thought, Tychelle?
No. Go ahead. I was about to.
I'll put it on
something else.
I'll put it on the screen.
Awesome.
All right, so
can you read it? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll read it. Thinking of the topic, have there been any specific pieces of media that you've seen that have been especially impactful? Any you've seen that were especially problematic?
So I think we talked about this as we were like preparing to even have a conversation when I was growing up, like watching the movie Save the Last Dance, right? And we were talking about that because Kerry Washington's character has a monologue about how white women are stealing black men. And of course, I don't necessarily relate to specifically that because my husband is white and I am black. But I think there's been a larger conversation too on TikTok about whether a biracial person has a black mother or white mother. And I think a lot of that comes from having children and who carries the culture and how that culture is then passed down. I think, but when I think, I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but like, I think when it comes to media, we try not to like digest media specifically about, we're like, when Kamala Harris became the vice president, people were like, aren't you so proud? And I was like, well, I don't really like her politics, so nah, like it's not progressive enough for me, so no, but am I happy that she's a woman who's married, like, because her husband, specifically because she is biracial, even though she's biracial, but also her husband is a white Jewish man. They're like, aren't you so happy to see yourself represented in the White House? And I was like, no, like that doesn't mean anything to me specifically. So I don't know if there's any media I could point to that I said that I think is specifically helpful. I think one of the first times that me and my husband had not one of the first times, but one time that we had a really deep conversation was after we saw the movie 42 about Jackie Robinson, because there's the coach of, coincidentally, the Phillies was really, really racist to Jackie Robinson when he came to play, but then he also talked about hating Jewish people as well. And I was like, oh, well, that's the both of us right there. Like, he hates black people and Jewish people. So then we had a conversation about it. I think when we're talking about things that are impactful for us, we kind of, we want to learn the history of Judaism. We want to learn we want to talk about what that looks like. We want to talk about the history. So we have a bookshelf, and we have one shelf that's like all about race, and then we have one shelf that's all black authors about race, and then one that's like all things about Judaism. So like that's our bookshelf that's behind us. So we read those books. We talk to each other about that. We are engaged. We took a trip to St. Louis, where my husband is from, and in the car we listened to Nice Racism. But that's us. We're like that research couple. So I would say that's my experience specifically. I don't know. How about you, Carissa?
Yeah, I think media is a tricky one for me because I don't know if I often see mirrors as we would often see in our work, right? Things that are really reflective of my experiences and the kind of relationship that my spouse and I have. So that also speaks towards it too, the lack of media that's available in showing everyone and kind of representing all the different experiences that could exist in interracial relationships. So I think oftentimes we're doing kind of the piecing together, kind of like Tychelle was saying. We are often trying to watch more in terms of Korean dramas, Korean reality shows. Netflix has increased a significant amount of those, especially with, I think, recent explosion of Squid Game. And but I think that's really part of, I would love to know myself, really, if there are more media resources out there that can help us talk about this. But as of now, we do a lot of our own research, just trying to bring it together and have conversations around it. I think the closest one right now that we recently saw is Kim's Convenience. It's pretty lighthearted as well, but not necessarily interracial dating specifically, but a little bit. There is a character in there, the brother, whose name is Chong, who is in a relationship with a white partner, and just some of the kinds of language barrier, or even just like customs of complimenting when the mom cooks something. There's different things like that kind of shows the reality of it, but also that's just one. Right. I think that's what's problematic, is that there is that lack of.
I was thinking about Kim's Convenience Store too, because just and I think the thing that's so great about that show was its simplicity and regularity. Like, it was just so like general. It was like, this is Korean life in Canada, and it was the same. It's the same for me. So like, there are not that many shows that just depict like Black life as is. The 90s had a lot of them, but for me, it's the show Insecure. This is Black people living their life. It's not like the Asian sidekick or the sassy Black friend. It's like this is that, and then we mix white characters in. And that's the thing about when you're watching a show. If you watch a Black TV show, there will be white characters, but you can watch if you watch a Black show, there will be white characters. If you watch an Asian show, there will be white characters. You can watch a show with all white characters, and you will never see a Black person. Like, people argue about that about Friends, about there were 3 characters, 3 Black people and 1 Asian person in Friends, and they all seemingly played the same character. But, so I digress. That's a whole other in media.
I think that's a good point, because that made me think about just one thing too. It's the same with my story, right? What I'm just saying is I'm just telling you my story. I do not represent any other Korean people, even though there is sometimes that burden of it, right? And that's the same with Inconvenience too. I think watching it, there's times where I'm like, oh, that can be turn into a stereotype. Sometimes there's definitely stereotypes come from some truth, but it's just not the whole truth, or it's not applicable to everyone. So there's that danger of that just want to call out.
Yeah.
So I've got a question. Are there any folks that you would recommend that they should not date interracially? And I have a story about this.
So tell us your story, and then as we try to form our answers around that.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to hear what you all think. So I got divorced in grad school. Sad, very, very sad story. We need a bottle of wine to discuss, but I'm fine now. Don't worry. Remarried, very happy. Okay. But I started dating again in grad school, and jumped on OkCupid, went on some dates, whatever. At one point, this very handsome Black gentleman who is a law student messaged me. He seemed absolutely wonderful. I was at a point in grad school where I was waking up for kind of the first time to a lot of my, like internalized white supremacy, for lack of a better term. And I was so scared to do further damage to a partner by like having half-baked racial consciousness that I just didn't message this guy back. And then I got worried that I was being racist for not messaging him back, and like, oh, am I racist for not being into dating a Black guy? But there's a reason I don't want to date a Black guy, because I'm still learning a lot about this stuff, and I don't want to do more damage. So it was like this whole, like, I got agonized over this, and I ended up just not messaging him, and then I felt bad. But anyway, I took myself out of the fray in that particular story at that time in my life. But yeah, so given that, what would you have said to me at that point if you could say? Should I have just gone for it anyway? I don't know. Maybe life could have been different.
Maybe not. Maybe you didn't for a reason, but
yeah.
I don't know. Did you want to jump on that question, Carissa, or do you want me to start?
Go ahead first.
So one of the things I think, and this is something that I'm sure Carissa will agree with, if you are not ready to have conversations about race and have your whiteness challenged, you shouldn't be in a relationship, in an interracial relationship, because it is a constant conversation. But it's the same thing. Like, I think as we are challenging not only white supremacy, and we're also challenging the patriarchy, if you're going to be in a heterosexual relationship as a woman with a man, he has to be ready to have, like, just because you're in a politicians use this all the time, like, oh, I'm not, misogynistic, I'm married to, and I have daughters, and you're like, that's not how that works. So you have to be ready to have those things challenged. We constantly have conversations about race. We have conversations about gender, but we're having conversations about race all of the time. Like, I'll give my husband a book. We'll read it. He has to be engaged in this conversation, and probably more than the average person because I do DEI work. But I wouldn't recommend it for a person who is in the stage of fetishism, which happens. I'm not going to say it happens with all, but there's a lot of white women who fetishize Black men and don't even know that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. They'll be like, he's so gorgeous, or he has a big, whatever. And they're not, and men often, because they lean into patriarchy, think that they're just they love being, enamored by women, that they think it's great. But I had a conversation with one of our producers as we were talking about interracial dating like a couple years ago, and there was an interracial couple, a white woman and a Black man, and we were just like, and white women need to know. And this white girl got up and was like, because her husband was Black, but I'm not saying that at that point you should be like, well, we should have some of these conversations. But the same people who shouldn't date interracially probably shouldn't have like transracial adoption, because you have to know and be ready to learn and be ready to engage. It's so much, because he needs to know that the things that I go through, but then also not know that he can't be like taking them on. Because one of the things that I see so often in this work is white people say, I really am doing DEI, or they'll say, I'm passionate about DEI work because my husband's Black. But what about all the other people that are not your husband, right? Or your cousin's Black, or your whatever. And it's that same thing. Like, you have to be ready to have conversations and have your view challenged. And the people who are not ready for that should not be dating interracially. I don't know, Carissa, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts around, and I'm thinking about it from a family point of view as well. Just thinking, because I remember early on, and I was joking before when I was saying my parents love my spouse more than me right now, for sure. And if, I think knowing that my family was having a hard time processing it for themselves, and we went through years of like, talking, not talking, because I was dating interracially. And I think if you also have a family dynamic like that, you might just want to, I don't know about should or should not. I think it's like really thinking about, are you going to be able to have some of those conversations? And there's hurt that comes along with a lot of times when your family members are not accepting of the person that you love, right? And so how are you going to repair and restore that kind of relationship in the long run? So if you're not, I would say you have to be ready for that. So like Tychelle saying, you have to have conversations. So you have to know if you're going to be ready for those conversations, if you want to maintain and still have relationship with people, who you're close with. And I think I wouldn't have been able to do any of this or be still in this relationship if my partner wasn't open to those conversations. And there's the reality, right? We have a child, and we have to think about, I remember having this conversation with my husband when we were dating. He looks just like his dad. Their genes are pretty strong on that side. And I said, I'm sure you may have pictured your future child looking like you. Your child's not going to look like you, right? I know that for sure. That's the first thing that came to my mind. But so we had to have some of those real conversations. So if you're not prepared for that, I think relationships of anything, dating, marriage, it's hard as it is. There's like, work that needs to be done around it. So this is an added thing. So you do need to be prepared for it. I think is what I would say.
It's so funny because I didn't even get into the family aspect of it. Now, my family wasn't like against me dating. My mom knew I liked white guys from the Hanson, right? Like, so she was like, and it also, right. And it also kind of like, my mom was like, it steered away from the boys in my neighborhood. So she was like, my daughter's not dating that. She likes NSYNC. So that was like a thing she would say. But my mom also loves my husband. Like, he said to her, because Yom Kippur just passed, and it's like, you do atonement. He said, "Oh, have I transgressed against you?" And she brings that up in conversations. Like a month later, she's like, Ben asked me if I transgressed against him, and I was like, okay, Mom, like, relax. I was like, he didn't just. Oh, okay, I let her have it. But it is, and those are conversations we have to have with his family, with my family, with how his family interacts with my family. Like, the first times our parents met was at the wedding, and I was just because our mothers both have really strong personalities. So I was like, how's that gonna be? They met at our first pandemic wedding, which was 2020. But just if they say you marry a family, but are you willing to give up your family if something happens, right? And Carissa, we had that same exact conversation about having children. I think we were like laying in bed one day, and I was like, are you gonna be okay if your children look Black and they don't look like you? And he was like, yeah, like, I wouldn't marry a Black woman if I wasn't okay. I was like, but like, you're gonna have a child, and you're gonna be walking, you and your white self gonna be walking with this brown baby. And I was like, there's a lot of conversation for me on my side, because people may see me and think I'm my child's nanny, right? They're gonna think they could think you're an au pair, right? Like, and you're like, I'm actually not. Like, this is my child. But if my child is light, then I'm the nanny. If my child is dark, then my husband adopted a baby, right? So in that conversation, but I had that same thought. I was like, your kid's gonna be black, right? Like, or do you? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm just saying, like, it's a thing. So we'll have to talk after this too, Carissa, because we're probably having the same exact conversations with our spouses.
Yeah.
So definitely. I just think that people should really be ready to have conversation. And that's one of the things when we start talking about this, and I was like, are there any advice that we could give? And I started pulling up articles. There are articles out there, people, and all of the articles, no matter which ones I saw, said you can't shy away from race-based issues, right? You can't shy away from women in Atlanta being killed at a massage parlor. You can't shy away from George Floyd being killed by white men. You have to have those conversations. And if you're not, then your relationship is based in like falsehood, and it may work for you, but is it going to work for the children that you're going to raise, right? Like, that's a different thing. So I think that's the hard one. Go ahead, Mel.
Well, it's amazing talking, like, whenever I post like a, anti-racist thing on TikTok or social media or something, so I will invariably get a dozen or so people, white folks, jumping on there saying, I can't possibly be racist. I don't want to talk about this. We should just have color blindness because I have a spouse of color. It's amazing to me the amount of white people who say things like that. Like, my best friend is black, so therefore I don't have to talk about this or think about this at all. And I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. You're wrong.
No,
And,
I mean, I recently had a conversation about that too, and I know we'll have to table that conversation for a different one when we're talking about. Today I was actually talking to somebody about racial identity development, and there's an actual like process for it for BIPOC folks, because we have to have a racial identity development, and for white folks. And there are people of color who want to be white, right? That want to align themselves with whiteness. We can see that there are people like Candace Owens out there. There are people who have these who live in that, and they're just like, and sometimes you will also hear white people say like, my friend said I'm not racist because, and my friend lets me say the N-word, and I'm like, oh, your friend needs some help. Send them to me too. Send them to me too. So it is really, really hard in having some of those conversations. I know we've reached some time too. We're getting close, and I kind of wanted to get in an audience question, but I wanted to see if Mel, you had any other questions, or if Carissa, if you wanted to chime in with anything as well.
It's okay, Mel. Go ahead with the questions. I think
my last question was, and this is something we wanted to talk about when we were planning the show, is like, any last advice for doing doing anti-racism work while dating interracially. And we talked a little bit about having these difficult conversations. It also brings to mind things we've talked about in the past. Not expecting, if you're like, for example, if you're a white person dating a person of color, don't rely on that person to educate you constantly. Then you're like taking advantage of their time and effort, when you could be educating yourself. So that seems like another big thing we should definitely mention too.
I think too. So I'll say one of the first disagreements that my husband and I had when we first started dating, and this is his racial identity development and his awakening before 2020. Thank goodness, because I'm not sick of hearing people say 2020 was their racial awakening. It's just becoming really old really fast. Like, racism was happening before then. But he said to me, this was 2013. He said, well, things are better. And I was like, no, they're not. They're just different. He was like, no, but they're better. And I was like, no, they're not. They're just different. And he was like convinced that they were better and upset that I was telling him otherwise. And because my husband is a researcher by nature, he came back, like, we had he left, we were dating, so he went home. This was a conversation we were having while we were out. And he came back and was like, whoa, things are not better. They're just different. And to me, that meant a lot to me, because he went out and did the research by himself.
Yeah.
And then came back and we had a conversation. And then I knew I could date him, because if he was stuck in that things were like better, then I don't know if our relationship would have progressed to the point where now we are married. That was 8 years ago. But that he did that meant so, so much. And I think for me, doing this work is staying authentic. I have to untangle myself from white supremacy culture as well. And I stop people. And one of those things I was saying earlier, when people say, oh, your child's going to be pretty because they're biracial. No, I stop people and let them know that that's not the goal. That's not the ideal. So I do the same thing with oh, you're gonna, make a lot of money, or your husband, or you, like my last name, I took his last name, but I hyphenated because I am still me in our marriage as well. But like, I don't think that I'm better because I married a white man. Like, if anything, he's better because he married me, a woman. Like, men do better when they marry women. Well, men who marry women do better health wise. But I like make sure that I'm staying grounded, and I don't think it's as hard now because so much is happening in our stratosphere around race that I have to stay grounded. But I don't want to be connected to him because of his whiteness. I want to be connected to him because of his personhood, and I think that pulls away from the fetishism of any person. Like I want to marry a tall white man, and he's gonna be so, I don't know, Prince Charming, or I don't know, a pilgrim, or whatever. I don't know anybody, but like that's not
Who
like
fantasizes about marrying pilgrims? What?
I don't know,
What
but
are you
like, what is it? Like, there's like a I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. I don't think about pilgrims.
The tall,
I'm just saying.
the tall pointy hats and the stern looks.
Cannot wait to marry a I'm sorry, that was
hey
weird.
baby.
Anyway, Carissa.
I don't know if I can have a same train of thought after that one.
Anything that you have to stay into about doing DEI work and being married, like pilgrim. Sorry.
I kept thinking about, there's times where I feel really exhausted doing the work and tired, and the fact that I have a partner, and the reason why I did fall for this, well, not fall, but like why I really engaged with my partner as my life partner, is because I just saw him as a person who really genuinely was open to learning and growing with me, and not just like as partners in life. And so anytime I feel exhausted, I know that he's someone who I can talk to and really try to decompress by processing what might have happened. And he does the same thing where he'll go and research things. One thing that's really been helpful for me in doing the work is we've had intentional conversations around him stepping up and saying things instead of me. Right. And there's also the family dynamic again of sometimes coming from him, it comes differently. A, because he's a white male, and B, because like he might have a different family dynamic structure within his family than me trying to say something. So we've talked about, I think some of those intentional conversations is what's important. And I needed to come up with the courage to do that too, because growing up, I totally internalized actually a lot of the dominant culture. So I totally said, hey, no, I don't know if there's white privilege. Like if you asked me as a high school student or younger, I wouldn't have been talking about some of these systemic oppressions. So, like I need that courage. I needed that courage to step up and talk about it, but I also needed a partner who can do that. And I think that's what keeps me going too, is like knowing that there's people also like Tychelle that I can talk to. Mm-hmm. Just that kind of network and social connection is, I think, important in doing any of this work, and for all of us. It's not just for people BIPOC, right? It's white people benefit from and need to do this work.
Absolutely.
It's not
and it is, I think, too, like also knowing to like not surround yourself with just other white people, like that can be exhausting in itself as well, because then you're constantly having to learn and teach and things like that, or not learn but teach. And that's the thing, my husband gets chances to spend his white privilege. Like I told him, like when we have a baby, like you need to be like, because of Black maternal health issues, you need to be advocating for me when I am when I am like, use that. He's like, absolutely. So we have a plan for like being able to address doctors, and fortunately his mother's a physician. So we talk about all of those things as well, but we need to be having those conversations, right? Because it's really, really important. So I wanted to get to an audience question. I know Mel's a better out loud reader because she's an author. So if you're willing to, and I think it's under our segment.
I'll show it here.
Oh, good.
It's not showing the whole thing, but I can still read it. Okay, so here's the first part. Wait, hold on. This is in 3 parts.
Yeah, it's a long question. I think it was somebody.
Here we go.
Yes.
Okay. When I mention to people that my children are Black, many white people will try to correct me and say that they are mixed. When they say this, it really bothers me. If these white folks had no clue who my kids folks, I'm not doing a great job of this, but
and I gave you props before you did. I'm sorry.
If these white folks had no clue who my kids were or who the parents were and saw my kids walking down the street, they'd say those are black kids. I feel as if these white people get offended if I or my kids don't honor the white quote unquote presence within my kids. Whoa, that's a really interesting way to say it. My kids identify as black, so I call them black. My question is, where's the rest of this? I'll just read it. Let's see. Here we go. My question is, what's wrong with my children identifying as being black, even if their mother, me, is white?
So I thought when I saw this question come up, I really thought about it because me and my husband have made a conscious decision to call our children black, because of how I am, and I'm being pro-black, but then also, like I said earlier, my husband is Jewish, so their religion and part of their ethnicity will be Jewish. Now, we also have to contend with phenotypically what they will look like. They may not present phenotypically as black people, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's a chance for that mother to challenge white supremacy in that. I think white families would want you to do that. On the street, most people are going to call her children black, right? And then if they identify as black, people are going to accept them as black because of what they look like. From her question, her saying that they look black and they call themselves black. I don't think that there's anything wrong with calling your child what they prefer to be called, whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing as a parent. Like Carissa and I have had questions, and of course, because she has a child already, we've not had questions, we had conversations about you get to be a vessel for your child to get here as a mother, but then you also get to be a steward, right? A shepherd of them, but they are going to be whatever your creator or universe has allowed them to be. You're just going to be here to show them the way and for them to teach them to be the most authentic them. So if her children feel like they are black people, and if they phenotypically for them look like black people, I don't think it is anything wrong with that. I think we also have to really, and this goes really deep, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but black people were the first people. So anybody can have a child and that child appear to be black, right? Like that's a real thing. There's genetics that happen in that way. So there are white women carrying black children because phenotypically they might look black, right? So I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think you just really have to challenge who's ever saying that to you. Most likely it's usually family. They'll be like, but they're half white, they're mixed. And I'm like, well, your children are 100% white, 100% black, and who they choose to identify is their choice. And that doesn't stop them from being part of your family as well. But why can't you just have black people in your family? Why can't you just be okay with them being black people? So I think that mom is doing the right thing by honoring what her children want to be called and how they see themselves. And it sounds like she does not have a problem with them being black. She doesn't not feel a part of them, or that they are a part of her, even though she is white. And I think when we're talking about that, we also have to then unpack whiteness and say what is white, or what is, and because like, what is her family heritage? Is it Irish? Is it Italian? Thinking about like that. And what is whiteness? Whiteness was made to exclude other people, right? As a term. They're white. They have white blood. And it's like, well, okay, what does that mean? And how does that play out? And I'd love to hear, Carissa, your take on it as well.
Sure. I mean, it's a really interesting question, and one that I'm really thinking about within my own context and my own identities, racially, as well as a identity as a mom. Like, what would I do in that situation too? And as I mentioned, my daughter at various points in life may look more white or more Asian. And once she gets to that age of being able to talk, I think I would absolutely have that conversation with my daughter too. And I would want to honor where my daughter is in terms of how she's identifying herself. And I also feel strongly about making sure that she recognizes that with white experiences, that there is privilege, and that if she's being treated in that way and she's getting privilege, I want her to be able to also recognize it and counter racism and other systemic oppressions when she sees it. So I want to be also mindful of that and having that conversation of like, yes, I this is how you identify. I'm gonna honor that right now, absolutely. But I want to keep having conversations so that it's not forgotten as well. And like similar my journey as well, right? Through my understanding of my racial identity could constantly change until I had a better understanding of, right now as an adult, the actual history behind it and the systemic oppression behind it, outside of my own individual control. So I think it's a, I think there can't be that right or wrong necessarily. In this case, it's such a hard question as well. And I think there's a matter of the kids being confused. So we also, I think, have to be mindful of where they are in that journey, and just meet them where they are too, knowing that we can continue conversations later on so that hopefully they have other awarenesses that kind of help them better understand the context of it.
Too, yeah, I think about that because I think too, like, I want to. Me and my husband have had the conversation of calling or of saying our children are black and that they're Jewish, but who knows who they decide to be, right? Like, what if they don't have a religion? What if they don't identify with that? Being able to honor that for who they are. But if her children have decided to say this, like, being able to embrace their cultures, right? Because it's we think I want to be able to focus a lot on culture, right? Like, hopefully we'll get there, the rest of the world will get there. Hopefully inside of my house we get there a little bit quicker because we're there and we're having those conversations that we want the world to be having, that they are not like wanting to present their privilege first. It's going to be a lot harder because the adjacency to whiteness for blackness is completely different. Like, if we're looking at whiteness and what's adjacent to whiteness, conditionally or whatever, black people are not there, right? And I'd want them not to be like, well, there's no white privilege. And then I'm like looking at them like, no, this is not a thing. So I think about that for that person. Honor who your children feel like they are, and also talk to them about privilege. But then also, as a white mother, it's your job to then talk to those other people about white privilege and the privileges that they have, to honor this white presence within them. And as you said, like, that's a really interesting way to put it, and to be able to combat against that. Like, but what is whiteness? Why does that matter? My children are who they are, and they are many things, but their culture is this. And I think that's it is a hard question. I can't answer it specifically for that person, but from my view, I think that's part of it. Yeah.
It just seems like I just thinking, so the white people who are taking issue with, this woman's like biracial, multiracial kids like identifying as black, which like they are black, like I would guarantee you those same people are like, oh, I'm 1/16 Native American, so I get to have a scholarship for, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that seems like kind of like yet again another insidious like function of whiteness to claim racial identity when it benefits us, and to reject racial identity when we get to marginalize someone else. So yeah, I think it seems what you're saying sounds really important, because I've actually heard a lot of biracial and multiracial people saying they don't feel like they quite fit into any community. And I think if you bring this back to community and the inheritance that you have as being part of a community, that's a gift, right? That should be a gift, not a burden.
I think that social culture of like having to categorize yourself, like why do you have to? And in some ways, we do have to name things in order to address it. So there are times we need to do it. And I think about it from the kids' point of view, because I'm Asian, my husband's white. Neither of us have that experience of being mixed race or biracial, but we're going to be raising a child without having had that experience. And it is, so I've been trying to do, my husband and I both have been doing a lot of reading, right? Trying to hear stories from mixed race people about their childhood. And the biggest theme that we keep seeing is confusion, right? Because just as Mel, you said, where I'm not like quite like my mom, I'm not quite like my dad, or I'm not like my other mom, or I'm not like, like, it's just this confusion of trying to have to figure out why I have to like indicate where I am. I'm developing my identity as is, and it's confusing as it is, but it's interesting that we also in a way try to have our kids have to identify at certain points.
And I think for me, it's going to be a little bit different too, like the identification part of it, because of the struggle of chattel slavery in this country and where Black people currently are, and that this identification means so much to us because pro-Black is a thing, Black is beautiful is a thing. So having part of those conversations, but we are also, Carissa, when you said it, was like, we are also doing the same thing. And luckily there's so many right now, at least celebrities that are both Black and Jewish, which people don't even know about. So there's Rashida Jones from The Office, there's Tracy Ellis Ross, there's Lenny Kravitz, there's Drake, right? And somebody like, you know what I mean? So we have, you know, like not necessarily a map or a blueprint, but like there are people that they can look to. And they're also, I just went to a conference and there was a biracial Black Jewish person. And there's Jews of Color, there's the jewsofcolor.org that are ran by, you know, Jews of color of many different ethnicities, but one of the people is a biracial Jewish woman, a biracial Black Jewish woman, and there are activists out there. So that was really exciting to us when we like found that there were biracial Black Jewish activists that embrace both parts of their culture, because it is something that we won't have experience in. I'm not going to be. So we want to like be able to have somebody that they can engage with, or what that looks like for them, that's going to be different from who we are, and being able to accept that. We could probably have this conversation for like another 2 hours because there's so much to unpack. And I know we did like there's some things we want to talk about, and we won't get to all of them just because there's so much. And so maybe we'll have a round two. There's definitely some other conversations that I want to be able to bring Carissa in on. So I just really wanted to thank you for being here with us, having this conversation, engaging, and being open and candid about your personal life and the work that you do and how it impacts in that way. So I really wanted to thank you. And I just selfishly wanted to bring you on because I like working with you like all the time. So I wanted to say thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And you know, Tychelle, you know that anytime. I always love working with you as well. But it's been really refreshing in a way too, because like I said, I don't think there's been many platforms to really share some of these kind of stories. And it was so relevant, especially having a 3-month-old. And we've been doing so much work ourselves in our house right now with being interracial parents. So thank you so much, and creating this platform for all the topics that you both are covering now and in the future as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here. And please just keep up the good work with you. Being a mom of a 3-month-old and a PhD student, I don't know how. You are superhuman. That is amazing, and good job.
I know.
Thank you. I'm glad. I was gonna say if today there were any hiccups, I was gonna say it's because I did not sleep very much, but
Couldn't tell, honestly.
always engaging. So we wanted to do that. We wanted to make sure we got this conversation in, and that we got an audience question. So thank you all for being part of this conversation with us, and we'll be back next Tuesday at 8 p.m. live, having another conversation. And you can find us, and Mel can tell you all the places you can find us, because I always forget.
Yeah. Okay. So live, you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Most weeks you can find us on TikTok. We had some technical difficulties this week. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Store, Google Play, Amazon Music, or Spotify. So there are so many ways to follow this show.
We're in your pocket.
We're
on your computer.
Everywhere.
We're everywhere. So until next time, and join us back here next Tuesday. We'll be having another conversation.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.